Hi! So last week I did a video tutorial on how to mat and frame your scripture pictures or your family photos. And I gave you 3 options for different ways that you could do that. The last option was the do-it-yourself method. And I mentioned that you'd have to purchase a mat cutter and do this all at home by yourself. And like I said, this is the most economical choice of the 3. And so today I want to show you exactly how to do that at home with your own mat cutter. Now, I wanted to share what kind of mat cutter I bought. It's the Logan Intermediate Mat Cutter. I found it on eBay for I think around $100. And so maybe you have one like this or something similar, but I wanted to show you the process of how to go about cutting your own mats from home. And so first I wanted to share with you what you need to gather before you get started. Of course you'll need your print, the print that you want to mat, your mat boards. Now you might choose to do a single mat or a double mat. I'm doing a double mat today. So I have my outer mat color and my inner mat color. You also will need a ruler, a pencil, printer's tape. This is not printer's tape, but you can find it at any craft store. Some spray adhesive, and then your mat cutter, which comes with a straight cutter and a beveled cutter. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that you need to do is cut down the size of your mat board to the right size. So like I said, this is the picture that we're going to be matting today. This is a 16 by 20 print, and we're going to be placing it in an 18 by 24 frame. So I kind of have a little formula that I like to use to determine the window that you need for your mat board. But before we even do that, first we need to just cut this down to size. So it's going in an 18 by 24 frame, and so we just simply need to cut this mat board down to 18 by 24 size. And you might want to just go a tad bit smaller than 18 by 24 because otherwise you will have a really tough time getting it in your frame. It won't quite budge in there. So just make it a tad bit smaller than your frame size. So we're just going to flip it over. Anytime you're working with mats, you always go to the back side and work with that. So we're just going to make some measurements here. I'm going to measure our 18 up here, and then our 24. There we go. Remember, I had a college professor that said you always measure twice and you cut once, so make sure that your measurements are correct before you actually cut. So we're going to go ahead and cut this mat board now. This is the mat guide, and you're going to need that for your window cut, your bevel cut, but not for your straight cut. So we're going to take that off. We're simply going to place this in our mat cutter. There's a guide here at the bottom. You want to make sure that your mat board is secure down there. Line up our line here, take our straight cut, and I'm going to apply a little bit of pressure. And just cut all the way through. Okay. Now we're going to do our other cut. Line that up. There's a little groove that this straight cutter fits into nicely. Just going to cut that. Okay, so now we've done our outer mat. It's our 18 by 24 size. And we're going to go ahead and do the same thing to our inner mat. Just get all these straight cuts out of the way so we can focus on our beveled cuts in just a minute. For this one, we're going to go about a ½ inch in from the one that we just cut. So instead of 18 inches, we're going to do 17.5. And I've actually already measured this, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut it. But it's 17.5 by 23.5 is the size for this one. Do the same thing, measure it, and go ahead and cut. Now if your blade starts to get dull when you're cutting, then you can just buy some replacement blades online through the company that sells your mat cutter, or you can probably buy it at any craft store as well, especially if it's a popular brand. And you just switch out the blade pretty easily if it starts not cutting very well. Okay, there we go. So now we have our outer mat and inner mat boards cut, and as you can see, the white is just a little bit smaller than the blue. Don't need those anymore. Okay, so now we are ready to do our bevel cuts. This is the fun part. We always start with our outer mat and then we go into our inner mat. So now we need to figure out what size of window do we need for our mat. And I like to use a little formula when I'm trying to figure that out. So if you think about this is the same size as the frame. We're going to have our picture in the middle here. So what we need to do is we need to take the frame width minus the print width, and we're going to divide that by 2. So the frame width is 18 by 24, so 24 inches, and the print is 16 by 20, so 24 minus 20 inches is 4. We divide that by 2, so you're going to have 2 inches on either side of your print. Now the bottom, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take the 18 minus the 16. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So that would just leave 1 inch at the top and the bottom, which is not really enough, I don't think. You could do it, especially if it was a single mat, but since it's a double mat, that's not really going to be enough mat. And so I chose to just go 2 inches all the way around. I kind of like when the mat is all the way the same all the way around. I think it looks, usually it looks better, just to be kind of consistent and looks a little more cohesive. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go 2 inches all the way around. I don't think I'm going to lose too much of my print. It's not going to cover up the words if I just, you know, go in another inch on either side. So now that we've determined that we need 2 inches all the way around, we are ready to go ahead and make our cuts. So to do this, we are going to bring that mat guide back, and we're going to put this back in place here. Oh, got it upside down. Has little knobs that you just screw to make it secure. And we're going to find the 2-inch mark. There's a ruler right here in the middle. I'm going to find the 2-inch mark and screw the knobs down tight. Okay, and whenever you're doing a mat with the bevel cutter, you always want to make sure that you have a scrap piece of mat underneath. So we're just going to use some of the scrap that we just got done cutting. We're going to line that up. And before you make your cuts, first you're simply going to make some lines all along the back side of your mat. You're just going to rotate it 90 degrees. Just go all the way around. With your lines. Okay, so now we have our cut lines. This is what we're going to use to determine where to cut. And we are ready to go. So here's the bevel cutter. It's obviously a little different than the straight cutter. It has a little pin. If you push this pin down, then a tiny little pin appears on the other side, and this is to stabilize the cutter before you actually push the blade down to make the cut. So you're going to line this up. There is a line right in the middle of the cutter where the blade comes out. line it up. Make sure that the groove is going in. My cutter wasn't up. That's what was giving me trouble. Okay. Make sure your cutter is all the way up. Line up the line here with your line that you just drew. Push the pin down, and then you're going to push this bevel cutter all the way in. You're going to make your cut. And you're going to go all the way to the next line that you drew. Make sure that you do not go past the line, or you will have overcuts on your mat, which won't look good. So you can see we just made a cut. You're just going to do this all the way around. Put the arm back down. Make sure the mat is all the way down here at this bar. Line up the lines, push the pin down, push the bevel cutter down, and make your cut. Even pressure. I always slow down when I get close to the line so that I don't overcut. Okay. We have 2 cuts. Just keep working our way around. You do have to push the mat cutter down pretty hard to do the cut, so it's kind of surprising how hard you have to actually push to make the cut. And like I said, this does take some practice, but once you get the hang of it, it's really pretty easy. You can get this whole process done in 15 to 20 minutes. Make sure that that line is lined up. It was a little off the guide there, so I had to make sure that I got that lined up, or we would have a crooked window. We don't want that. Make sure it's all the way down. Release the pin, and then you make your final cut. Okay. Let's see how we did. This one's sticking just a little bit, and there we go. Okay, looks good. So there is our outer mat. So we are ready now to do our inner mat. And make sure you don't toss this square because we actually need it for something in just a minute. Okay, I'm going to put the print aside for a minute. Now, you might think that you do the same thing with the inner mat. Go ahead and cut it just to make it, come in a little bit more from the outer mat, and then you put them together. But that's actually not what you do. And the reason for that is because if you have 2 separate mats that are already cut, and then you try to line them up together and make sure that the width is all the way the same all the way around, it's going to be really difficult to get that right. And so what you do is you actually glue the inner mat to the outer mat, and then you make the cut so that it's the same all the way around. So now what we're going to do, we're going to put the mat cutter down for a minute. The spray adhesive that I'm using is quite sticky, so make sure that you cover your area with some newspaper or some craft paper before you get started. Otherwise you will have sticky stuff all over your workspace, which is not fun. So make sure you cover your area with newspaper first. Now we're going to grab our outer mat. You're going to put the color down, face down, and You can get spray adhesive, make sure that it's permanent spray adhesive. If it's not permanent, if it's repositionable, then the mats will separate over time. So make sure it's a heavy, durable spray adhesive. I actually like the 3M brand probably the best because I feel like it's the strongest hold. So you just shake this up. And you spray. Nice even spray all the way around. This stuff smells nasty, so I don't want to be around it too long. Okay, and now we're going to get our inner mat. We're going to put the colored side face down and glue this to the back. Okay, just make sure it's really nice and secure before you start cutting. And that's why you want your inner mat to be just a little bit smaller than your outer mat so that you can easily adhere it without having to line it up just perfectly. So now you have your inner mat inside of your outer mat, and now we're ready to go ahead and make our final cuts for our inner mat. So if you remember the formula that we started with, we're actually going to come back to that formula now to finish up our mat cuts. So right now, the opening for the mat is the exact same size as the print itself. And so what we need to do is come in 1/4 of an inch from that original measurement so that the mat is actually overlapping the print, because otherwise the print would actually come through the mat, which is not good. So we're going to do the same measurements that we had before, but we're just going to add 1/4 of an inch all the way around. So it was 2, now it's going to be 2 1/4 of an inch. We're going to flip the mat over. Oh, and before we do that, we're actually going to tape the window back inside the mat cutter, or inside the mat window. You don't want to use permanent glue or anything for this, just masking tape will do just fine. And this essentially becomes your backing mat. So now we're going to adjust this mat guide to 2 1/4 inch. And we're going to do the same thing as before. We're going to mark our cuts, and then we're going to cut. Okay, now we are ready to make our final cuts. Come back to our bevel cutter. Same process, line up our cutter with the line, push the pin down, push the bevel cutter down. We're going to make these final cuts all the way around. obviously today I'm showing you how to do a double mat. If you were to do a triple mat, you would just follow the same process and adhere your third mat into the second window and just keep going that way. Okay, 3 cuts down. Here is our last cut. Okay, there we go. We have finished our mat. This is our finished mat. Let's see what it looks like with our print inside of it. There we go, that looks great. So now the last step is to just simply tape the print into the mat. And printer's tape is the best kind of tape to use for this. It's white and it comes, you can get it at any craft store. I usually just tape the corners diagonally across the corner. That should be secure enough. Okay, let's see what it looks like. There we go. There is our finished picture with our outer mat and our inner mat. Now this is just 1/4 inch, but you can also do a 1/2 inch if you want a little bit more of that inner mat showing. But hopefully you learned how to cut out your own mat at home. I hope it's been informative for you, and please, if you have any questions, just comment in the section below. Thanks for watching.